You don't want to put us under pressure or anything like that, do you?
No pressure, sir.
I think we heard just before lunchtime how difficult it was to speak before lunch when people were getting ready to go, but try do that when people want to go for beer. It's a bit more difficult, so please bear with me for the next 10 minutes. I think I have a clicker here, but I just want to introduce ourselves as the Stockholm Environment Institute. Many people may not know who we are, so we decided we'd just give a little bit of background about who we are and what we do. We are an international research and policy organisation. We work basically across the globe. We have offices in Stockholm, obviously, but here in Asia, in the US, in the UK, and in Africa, and now Latin America. So we have a global perspective working on what we do. For the last 5 years, we have been considered or rated independently in the top 2 international policy and research think tanks for the environment. So it's kind of a hard position to keep pushing, but we are enjoying it. And a lot of our work is to look at bridging science and policy through research and supporting decision-making with policymakers moving forward. To do that, we have a number of different research areas that we're involved in. And just to give you a quick understanding of those, we do it through 3 pillars, basically solutions-oriented research, followed by strengthening the capacity of partners that we work with, and then looking at evidence-based policy approaches, so that hopefully we bring about change and lasting change. And we do that through 9 kind of global initiatives. Gender and social equality, which is foundational to all that we do, sustainable sanitation, bioeconomy, climate finances, a new program on city health and well-being, fossil fuels and climate change, low-emission development planning, transforming development and disaster risk, and then finally producer to consumption sustainability. So we try and cover a range of areas that can support the private sector moving forward. However, I want to just start off with the world that we're looking at and how we want to take this forward. We also recently, the IPCC report and the impact of that in terms of climate in the future. We talk about limiting the world to 1.5 degree. This is going to require rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society, with clear benefits to people and natural ecosystems moving forward. So, to try and limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees is going to take a lot of work to do here. We're looking at global emissions that need to decline by 45% by 2030. Renewables should become 85% of what we're using by 2050. Coal should nearly be out by 2050. We're probably looking at about 7 million square kilometres of land for energy crops, an area the size of Australia almost. And we must meet global net zero CO2 equivalent emissions by 2050. So it's quite a challenge. And as you can see from that diagram, we still seem to be getting warmer and warmer. So these rapid changes can be accomplished through almost immediate establishment of a global climate, carbon market, massive improvements in energy efficiency, recasting people's diets, and looking at population growth, and the rollout of plans to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Not easy tasks to do, but happily every one of these approaches delivers further benefits, such as improvement of human health and planetary health, and increases security for environmental, social, and business issues. So the report tells us we must kind of look at rapid and significant changes in 4 key areas. As you can see, one of them is going to be in the industry and in cities and in land use and in energy, but unfortunately you look at as we improve society through the GDP, we're also increasing CO2 emissions, and that's not changing, unfortunately. So we need to change the processes of what we're doing. So within this overall arena, we have to look at the most well-planned infrastructures. We'll have to look at issues that are addressing kind of the looming problems that are happening with us and act deliberately and firmly in the short term, which, though it will cost money, is going to be cheaper than looking at the long term and a potential 2 degrees increase. I think I saw a report recently from Reuters which indicated the top 100 companies produce 71% of emissions. We don't want to point fingers at companies, we want to work with companies to try and see how we can change that. But we see throughout many of the industries we're still increasing consumption of power, and we see that going further and further into the future, not reducing. So we still have a lot of challenges on our hands. So climate change is extremely important, and it's in the interest of many of the small island nations in the Pacific and many of the low-lying lands here in Asia to really address this issue moving forward. If we continue past the 1.5 degree to 2 degree, we're going to see a lot more impact in terms of flooding and impacts that's going to have on communities. So we want to try and avoid that moving forward. Not only will it protect nations, but it will also bring about peace and security and stability throughout Asia, and also then, in that regard, support the trading partners that you have here and in the rest of the world. So how does SEI kind of work with this on the SDGs? Well, we provide basic kind of scientific research, support where necessary with capacity development and policy support, to conceptualization, implementation and follow-up on the various different goals. These slides are moving behind my schedule, sorry, but we want to make sure that we develop methods and tools within the SDGs themselves that enhance capacity within governments and other actors that we work with to adopt a systems thinking approach to the SDGs. Operationalizing policy coherence for sustainable development is critical, and we want to enhance kind of knowledge sharing across government, civil society, and now here with the private sector to try and work with countries, between countries, to provide that knowledge space so that people can work to develop and work together. And we developed various goals or various programs looking at SDGs and their interactions. And we see that there's many different interlinkages, there's many positive synergies, but also trade-offs we have to work with if we want to try and support everybody. So part of the program that we're looking at is how do we bring the multi-stakeholders together? How do we get them to understand what your priorities are, what other organisations or other departments' priorities are, work together to try and create a more positive approach to developing on the SDGs itself. So we need to work on the multi-stakeholder partnerships, and we need to make sure that the information that we're bringing towards from the science is useful for policymakers moving forward. And that's no difficult task. It's something that we're now hopefully looking at within the private sector to see how do we bring that knowledge into a new arena and how do we make it work successfully. So one of the examples that we've done over the past is to look at gender, and noting some of the panels that were there today, there was a heavy bias towards men on the panels. We need to change that perspective and make sure we integrate gender equity moving forward and gender equality moving forward. Examples of that in the business industry, looking at the energy, renewable energy across the Mekong region, we see that whilst there are policies in place, generally speaking, when it comes to gender and equality, they're siloed and they're separated. People don't discuss and work together. We see cases where maybe there are women working in the industry, but they're in positions where it's in HR, accounting, finance, but not necessarily in the power decision-making places, which are mostly done by men. So we need to change that dynamic to look at equity moving forward. Other areas of research, for example, are in climate finance. We look at different areas to see what's happening with the finances going into the current markets. There's a lot of what we call the stranded assets, where people are investing in old-style kind of power technology when we know that new advances are bringing on cheaper and more efficient power. So we need to change the system before we end up financing kind of and tying ourselves into future carbon systems moving forward. So looking at kind of some of the tools that we had, I won't go through them because it'll take too long, but there's a variety of tools that we've developed to support all of these different initiatives moving forward. We've talked about our policy engagement. We have a structured approach to working with stakeholders, working with partners in government, working with partners in private sector, and making sure that we co-develop and co-create ideas moving forward. We're not prescribing the way that we should do this. Many people think it's impossible, but obviously it's not, and we just have to come together to work on this. So this is why we started the program with global initiatives this year. Initially, we had worked previously, I think in 2015. Now we're setting up a 4-year program to work on the environment and social inclusion in kind of the business community. We want to try and assemble a number of different businesses that are working on the SDGs, and I think yesterday we had the initial roundtable discussion for that, and to try and see how we can work together to look at generating, co-producing, co-creating new ideas in research to support business ideas moving forward. We're not here to try and give you some off-the-shelf approaches. We want to make sure that together we design the ideas, we work with the various people that have the potential to influence change, and through evidence-based science you can take that forward into solutions-oriented approaches. So I think as we try and do that, one of the areas that we need to bring on board is obviously the private sector, and we're trying to now generate that link over the coming days, because we feel that you're the change makers. The amount of industry that's getting involved in the SDGs, the way that they're approaching the SDGs is very unique, and I think there's an opportunity to work with that to help develop a stronger approach moving forward. But we need to make sure that in doing that, we have, beyond our kind of focus on research and on policy, we need to make sure that we're addressing human rights throughout all of this approach, and that we're empowering kind of social equality throughout this as well. These are foundational work that we want to integrate in our research so that we feel that all stakeholders are involved in the process. So partnerships with you, the private sector, we hope and promise to just bring rich research drawn from our own work, which is evidence-based science, and also with a link to an extensive network of universities and different institutions that can help go from research into action, into policy. We want to co-create the ideas, we want to share the values that we have as an institution, and we want to work together to take this forward. So I would just say, given that our time is up, but appreciate the last 5 seconds of a late evening before you go for a drink. But the idea for us is to just please look at where research can support it, look at the ideas that we can co-create, and look at the production of material that can help you and help your businesses move forward. After all, I think it was from this report people said 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we have to look out for the planet for our grandchildren. Now we're looking out for our children. Well, actually, we're looking out for ourselves because the change is happening now. So maybe together we can create that change, a positive change moving forward. Thank you.